I'm going to take over, and I want to say, dear Minister of State, dear Professor Patzinger, dear participants of the conference in all parts of the world, good afternoon, everyone who's logged into this session now. On the 8th of July, 1867, 8 inhabitants of the Maori community of Tauranga in New Zealand wrote a letter to the General Assembly in Wellington. Their letter starts with the following sentences. This petition of your true and faithful friends, some of the people of Tauranga, prays that you will look into one of our troubles. Our very valuable carved house has been taken away without pretext by the government. We did not consent to its removal. Unquote. The letter goes on and explains how Te Hauki Tauranga, the ancestral meeting house, had been dismantled a couple of months earlier by the Minister of Native Affairs and taken to the Colonial Museum in Wellington. The letter lodges a vigorous objection against the removal, which was not considered to have been adequately compensated for. New Zealand historian Deirdre Brown discussed this case in more detail. The history of the oldest extant meeting house in New Zealand, which had been built in the early 1840s, the circumstances of its removal, the history of petitioning for its return, and its life at the museum. Currently, the negotiations as to the specific implementation of the New Zealand Parliament's decision of 2012 to return the house are well underway. The petition of the people of Tauranga, it is one of the earliest examples of protest against Western collecting practices. It goes without saying that we need to add a qualification here. One of the earliest documented examples that we know of at this point in time. It is one of the aims of this conference to dig up and to extrapolate more such cases from the colonial archive, to read the archive against the grain, and to counter the archival record with, for example, oral sources. Benedict Savoy's work on the rise of the restitution debate in the 1960s and the 1970s, and on its suppression in the following decades, is a very important point of departure for us. However, we decided to go back even further, taking the year 1970 as the actual end point of our conference. As a reminder, in 1970, the UNESCO Convention on the Means of Prohibiting and Preventing the Illicit Import, Export, and Transfer of Ownership of Cultural Property was issued after long discussions among its members. And while this was the first international convention to prevent the taking of cultural property outside the context of warfare, it still fell short in a number of important aspects. The newly independent nations, for example, were disappointed in the fact that the convention could not address or redress earlier colonial lootings. It is this disappointment that, among other reasons, gave rise to the international restitution debate of the 1970s. But what are the predecessors of that debate? Claims for return, repatriation, and restitution have long been articulated by individuals, communities, and governments towards colonial and post-colonial European actors and institutions. They've drawn on local ontologies and moralities that challenged and critiqued European colonial practices in a very fundamental way. And from the very beginning, protests against colonial looting of property and the abduction of bodies are as old as looting and abduction itself. We also want to look at the complex and often protracted negotiations underlying returns and restitution debates, as well as the constellations of actors that eventually shaped the trajectory of the artifacts of the human remains that had been abducted or of archival records. Why is it, for example, the German documentary filmmaker Hans von Schomburg could not but return the Marfwe stone from Hamburg to Liberia in 1926, when Liberian Consul General Momulu Masakwa filed a court case against him, as historian Lars Müller will show tomorrow. while in other cases, institutions and individuals brushed off and drowned protest and claims. When, why, and under which circumstances were claims successful or not? Was the decolonization really a watershed in this regard, as we tentatively suggest with our conference structure? And if claims were successful, could they present a model for the development of broader restitution politics in the present and in the future? But we'd also like to know what were the challenges, what were the pitfalls and shortcomings of restitutions in the past? And where was the release of objects maybe not motivated by agendas of redressing past injustices, but rather by more questionable approaches, such as washing one's hands of a problem, becoming oblivious of transnational entanglements, or vice versa, retaining access to the cultural sector of the ex-colonies. Questions like these will be discussed in panel 3, entitled, "Is it really decolonization?" ? Whether addressing successful or unsuccessful claims for the return of cultural heritage, restitution research can be seen not only as part of a historiography of resistance against colonialism, but also as a form of institutional self-critique that needs to be developed further by scholars, practitioners, and activists internationally. Eventually, we ask, what conclusions can we draw from all these observations? This is a question that will be dealt with in the roundtable discussion on Friday afternoon. We believe that it is important to ask this question in the face of the changes we are living through at this very moment. 1 month after the signing of a memorandum of understanding between Nigerian and German institutions and stakeholders, this has been mentioned before, and only 1 week after the return of 26 objects from the Musée du Quai Branly in Paris to Cotonou, Republic of Benin. The idea for a conference topic like this was born in conversations with historian Dag Henrichsen, as well as with the art historian Jonathan Fine. Jos van Burden's book, Treasures in Trusted Hands, provided important leads into the field, as did the project cluster translocations based at the Technical University of Berlin. Restitution research is not an established term as yet. Rather, it seems to be an emerging field, spearheaded by colleagues such as historians Sarah van Burden and Cynthia Scott, whose work on Belgian, Congolese, and Dutch-Indonesian negotiations inspired us a lot for the conference. The concept was developed further in discussion with our cooperation partners, the Research Center for Material Culture in Leiden, and when Modest constantly pushed us to think beyond mere case studies and take a more conceptual approach, which we are very grateful for. And historian Siraj Rasool supported the conference by acting as a sparring partner in a number of very important discussions. Eventually, the concept of the conference strongly profited from the submissions to a call for papers that we had circulated internationally earlier this year. We were fascinated by the papers we received and are grateful to all those who offered to present their work in public here at the conference. Already in the papers that we received, the intention to link past claims with the current states of the debate was noticeable. It proved to us how timely our approach was and how urgently needed a recurrence to the past is when trying to shape the future. However, in retrospect, the call did not reach out far enough. I must say we may have to further revise the formats of discussion, formats in which we learn and unlearn in order to enable a truly global dialogue. As a first step towards that aim, and to ensure we would cover various places, times, and contexts, and give voice to a multitude of perspectives, we additionally invited renowned practitioners and scholars in the field of provenance restitution and museum studies. A big thank you goes to historian Lars Müller, who refined our understanding of past claims for return and actual restitutions. We are delighted to begin the new publication series of the German Lost Art Foundation with his paper entitled Mapping of Claims Between the Mid-19th Century and the 1970s, which is based on his current research project. 3 more essays related to the conference topic, though much shorter, can also be found in the media section of the conference website, and their authors are Jan Hüsken, Rainer Hartum, and Reinhard Kössler. We hope that the conference will thereby inspire further research and debate. Last but not least, I would like to thank our cooperation partners from the Research Center for Material Culture and the Stiftung Preußischer Kulturbesitz, which together with us agreed to step back from presenting their own research to function as chairs in most of the panels, making room for esteemed colleagues. We would also like to express our gratitude to all our colleagues at the Foundation, in particular the press and event management team, who supported all our decisions, even if they came at an untimely moment, and without whom the conference would not have been possible. Inpolis Communication provided technical support for the conference and throughout the preparations, for which we are also very grateful. Our sincere thanks go to all the speakers, chairs, and interlocutors for their engagement in the upcoming days. And special thanks go to keynote speaker Noel Cajano, who stayed up very late indeed. It's currently close to 3 a.m. in the morning in Hawaii. Thank you very much, Noel.